Hey everybody, welcome to my tutorial on Mod Spotlight on Immersive Engineering. I'm going to do this a little different than most people do. The first episode is a very short peek at what you can do with Immersive Engineering so that you can see how it all works together and decide if this is a mod that you like and want to learn more about. To do that, I'll run you through an impromptu base I created here using mostly Immersive Engineering blocks. Now, while I definitely want you to watch my videos, there's nothing I despise more than my own time getting wasted. So my goal is to make sure that I'm not wasting yours. That being said, Immersive Engineering is a really cool mod to learn, especially if you like that whole steampunk industrial look, and you'll see that here in just a minute. It's also very useful if you intend to play FTB Infinity Evolved Expert Mode. You almost have to use it for early game power generation there. Now, if you're looking for a mod that's uber space efficient, this isn't it. Immersive Engineering is all about multi-block structures that look really cool and different. You'll want a mod like Thermal Expansion if you want to pack a lot into a little bit of a space. So with that said, we can go ahead and look. You can see I've got a set of windmills here. There's a lot of passive power generation in Immersive Engineering, which is very cool because once you put it up and get it running, then you don't have to worry about it anymore. You don't have to fuel it or anything like that. It's not a ton of power generation, but it gets the job done. It's pretty useful. So you can see the windmills here. Also, you can see I have a lightning rod here, which is a bunch of fence posts and a mesh of fence posts up there. And during a storm, when lightning hits this, it immediately puts a 16 million RF into the base of this lightning rod, which sort of serves as a storage capacitor. Again, it's completely passive. It's a fantastic boost to your power storage system when it does happen, but you can't necessarily depend on it because it's very weather dependent. So that being said, let's go down into the actual base. That's just power generation that has to be outside, or is best served outside. But down here you can see we've got a little base going on. We've got some passive power generation going on here with these thermoelectric generators, which I'm not going to go into too much detail here. I'll go into detail into those in later episodes. But they basically take the temperature difference between a hot block and a cold block and create passive energy out of that. Same thing with these water wheels. Each of these generates somewhere in the vicinity of 80 RF. It seems to change with each update. And they can be a little tricky to get configured right. But once you got them running, they just crank out a little bit of power, and you don't have to think about it again. It's pretty reliable. We can look at a little bit different in Immersive Engineering. As you can see, we don't have any flux ducts or anything like that. You actually see these cables running everywhere, and that's how the power is transmitted. As you can see from the water wheel, there's actually a kinetic dynamo here, which is what actually creates the power, and it goes into these connectors, which are then connected to wires, and you transmit the energy through these wires between connectors. We'll go into more detail on that in the tutorial as well, because there are different tiers of wires and all of that good stuff. We also have some basic power storage in these storage capacitors. You can see the top tier stores 4 million RF, so you're not going to be using this in late game, but they are pretty useful in the early to mid game. All right, so we'll take a little bit of a look at some ore generation or some ore processing. What we have here, let me see, I need to put some ore in here. If we've got, throw some ore up in here, you can see this is one way to do it. Drop the ore on a conveyor belt, which then drops the ores into this multi-block structure called a crusher. We'll go again into more detail later in the tutorial series. If you turn that thing on, and it's kind of loud, so I'm going to back up here a little bit, but you can see it crushes the ore, and you got nice little particle effects. It shows it getting crushed up, and it creates grit, which is sort of like pulverized metal, or same as you see in some of the other mods. They call it grit here instead of powder or dust or whatnot. So go ahead and turn that back off because it's kind of loud. But then the ore goes into this arc furnace, another big multi-block structure that basically just smelts your ores. And it does a bunch at the same time, so it's pretty cool. This is more of a late game ore processing or ore smelting. In the early game, you've got a cool little block here called an external heater, where you can use some of that passive power generation to power this sucker and hook a bunch of vanilla furnaces to it. You never have to put any coal in there, they just work, which is pretty neat for early game. Now, more on the ore processing side, Immersive Engineering has a neat little sort of alternative to an MFR laser drill, which is this Excavator. Now, it's not quite as overpowered as the laser drill is, and it's a little more cumbersome to move, frankly. But to use it, you have this core sample drill. I'll show you how to use this in the tutorial. But you have to put this core sample drill in a chunk and see if it has a mineral vein, and if it does, you can build this excavator, crank it on like so, and the buckets will start digging, and you can see the ores coming up out of it, and then going up the conveyor belt, and those will go right into that crusher that we saw just a little while ago. Now, a couple other cool little things I'll show you. There's some interesting lighting here as well. Immersive Engineering has these little standard lanterns. They're not powered, acts much like a glowstone lamp. But then it also has these floodlights, which are pretty doggone powerful. They actually project light in a 32 cone radius, and within that radius, they also prevent hostile mob spawns. You can use a breaker switch to turn them on and off. Now there's a little bit of lag because this is a 32 block cone of light, so it takes a little while to turn off. But you can see I've got 5 floodlights here, and that lights up pretty much the whole base. Then I've also, the second tier of powered lanterns are just these standard power lanterns here. And these act like little mini magnum torches. They'll prevent mob spawns within 32 blocks, which is really cool. And you can see they don't project a ton of light. If I turn it off, you can see sort of the effect there. But if I turn it back on, it's not bad at all. But these floodlights are really cool. I like using these. So, what else are we going to look at? If my lights would come back on. Well, I'll tell you what we'll look at is the non-passive power generation, which is, there we go, there's the lights, which is this diesel generator. This is a really cool multi-block structure. It looks like a big old diesel generator. It's got a little turbine fan right there, or radiator fan rather, and has particle effects that come up out of this smokestack. And you can turn it on. It sounds nice and noisy like a diesel generator would. You can see the radiator fan moving. It's a pretty cool little deal, and it cranks out, I think, 4,096 RF per tick. I'll turn that back off because it's loud. This thing runs on either Buildcraft fuel or biodiesel. As you can see, these farms in the background, we're using biodiesel here. These farms create plant oil and ethanol, which feeds into this refinery. And we'll just go in and take a quick look at that. So if you see the farm here, I've got melons that I ship downstairs and autocraft into seeds, and the seeds come to this industrial squeezer, which creates plant oil, which then gets piped into that refinery. And the same thing, I've got sugarcane here, gets pumped into this storage silo, and then gets piped into this fermenter, which creates ethanol. Those two fluids are then piped through these fluid pipes into the refinery I showed you a little bit ago, right here. Ethanol and plant oil go on these sides, and it creates biodiesel. And in this scenario, the biodiesel goes under the floor and gets piped through these pipes up into this fluid tank, which is a nice little silo for fluids, and then gets pumped out the bottom through this fluid pump under the floor and directly into the diesel generator. So it's a self-sustainable loop, which is much nicer than trying to deal with finding oil and creating buildcraft fuel all over the place. Now you might have noticed that these melons are magically going down these conveyor belts and turning into seeds, and how they're doing that is through an assembler, and this is basically Immersive Engineering's auto crafting mechanism. Another multi-block structure, like I said, not particularly space efficient, but it looks kind of cool. And you can see here I've got more melons coming down than I've got capacity. I really should have several of these lined up. But if you look inside, you can see standard little crafting grids. And this thing's interesting in that if you have a 3-step crafting process, you can configure the assembler to do all 3 steps. I haven't played with this much. I intend to in the future to kind of check it out. But that's a nice little feature. So we'll go back up. And I kind of glossed over these item silos. Basically, you can store up to, I think, 512 of an item in here. Don't quote me on that. That could be wrong. I know the fluid tank holds 512 buckets. But these, I mean, again, not very space efficient, but they look kind of cool. The whole thing has a very industrial, farmy kind of look to it, which is really neat. So anyway, that's a quick look at Immersive Engineering. I hope you like what you see. If you do, please take a look at the rest of the videos in this series, as we'll go into much more detail on how to use these and how to get them all set up and all of that. So it's time to wrap up this episode. If you found it useful, please take the time to like the video and show some YouTube love by subscribing to my channel. Go forth and be awesome.